You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we are going to tackle AVNs. And we're going to do this with Andrea Leigh, who's had a fantastic, very cool background and completely relatable and apropos to this conversation as a whole. Andrea, I'll kick it over to you. If you want to do like a brief intro on yourself and what you're doing now, and then let's jump into the background. And then I'm just going to start like peppering you with questions around AVNs because right now it's one of the hottest topics that's out there. There's things around profitability and AVNs that have an impact on that and Amazon and everything else. And can we horse trade with media dollars, all that fun stuff. But we can get all to that in a few minutes here. But I'd love to hear like what you're up to now. And then let's jump into the background and set us up for a great conversation. Sound good?
Sounds great. Yeah. Thanks for having me, Aaron. I appreciate it. I always love coming and chatting with you. I think this conversation is very timely, especially given tariffs. A lot of brands, at least on the 1P side, are going to have to pass cost increases through to Amazon. That's the question I've gotten like 10 times in the last couple of days. So very timely topic for us. So I'm founder and CEO of Loom Group. We're a consultancy and education firm focused on Amazon digital commerce for consumer brands, agencies, but just really helping brands be successful on Amazon. I have been working with brands for about 10 years across various capacities on my own, and then through the e-commerce agency that I ran for a few years called IdeoClick. We worked with a couple hundred brands there. And then a lot of them independently as well. But before that, I spent 10 years at Amazon as a category leader. And some of my first jobs there were launching what's called the competitive monitoring tool, or the price matching tool that Amazon still uses today. And I stayed as a subject matter expert and taught and trained others on that system for a number of years. And then I also went through 3 levels of ScottWorks negotiations training at Amazon for vendor managers. At the end of that training, we had decided as a company that we wanted to take it in-house and build our own negotiations training for our vendor management team. And I participated in building and teaching that program as well. I also interviewed, hired, trained, and unfortunately fired hundreds of vendor managers in my time at Amazon. So I've got a very intimate kind of look at it from Amazon side for kind of that earlier 10 years of my career, and then now 10 years on the outside working with brands on their Amazon strategy. So through that have developed kind of a pretty foolproof 4-step framework for brands. We teach this on site, do workshops, and just do advising, helping brands prepare for mutually successful negotiations, among other digital commerce topics, retail media, supply chain, hybrid selling, et cetera.
So when you say a workshop, are you going in at like an executive level? Because what I found just with a lot of brands, and even my previous experience, on the brand side was, executive level had no idea how Amazon worked. They were thinking traditional negotiations. And it was, me firsthand coming back saying, this is like nothing we've ever done before. And I was at a pretty large pharma company. They brought in professional trainers around how to think about, the negotiation process as a whole. But man, when I went in there, it was something completely different than we'd seen with any other retailer. And so when you say like you do a workshop, so you show up, is it online? Is it, I just think there's going to be a lot of people that want
forms.
that.
Yeah, we have all forms. So we can do webinars, we can come on site. But at the end of the day, what we're really doing is helping the brands understand and prepare for the key differences in this type of a negotiation versus, working with one of their other retail partners, because it is different. And I think, some of the key differences being it's still relationship based, but in a really different way than, maybe what you're used to if you've been working with Walmart or Costco or other retailers in your category. And then I think because I spent so much time on the other side doing it, I kind of understand the philosophy. And so I can help brands figure that out as well, like kind of how to put yourself in the position of the Amazon vendor manager and what they're thinking and what motivates them.
What are they thinking? I would love to know. And you said there's this 4-step framework, but in my opinion, some of my best when I went in there, for me, it was I had a particular vendor manager and they were completely data driven, and that lined with me. I'm a scientist by training. Here's the data, here's what I want to do. But the other vendor managers I had, it was totally crazy. So I'd love to understand, like, what are they thinking? And then is it worth going through this like 4-step framework really, quickly? I know I don't want this podcast to go an hour and a half, but I do also want to make sure before we wrap up, we talk about the tariff piece as well. So what are they thinking? And should we
Yeah,
go
what are they thinking?
Yeah.
Well, okay. So first of all, I think it's important to kind of root, and it's worth noting too, the framework we oriented around negotiating with Amazon, but you can use it to negotiate anything in your life. Actually, as I was developing it a few years ago, I shared it with a girlfriend and she used it to negotiate a pay raise at Meta successfully. So it can be used in a lot of different areas. It's really rooted in a lot of negotiations theory. But I think first it's important to like decide kind of what philosophy you're going to subscribe to. Amazon subscribes to interest-based negotiation. So I recommend brands line up behind that as well. And an interest-based negotiation is where both parties share all of their interests that underlie like all of the grievances, et cetera, and then try to jointly negotiate a solution. So the idea is the more interests you put on the table, the higher your likelihood of mutual success. So for example, if you're just negotiating on a damage allowance, one party wins and the other party loses. If you're negotiating on a damage allowance and a freight allowance and maybe some merchandising packages and an AVS and payment terms and trying to make some improvements to vendor lead times and all of these different things, you're more likely to come up with a mutually successful agreement because you have more items on the list that you can negotiate. Now, also, I think that can backfire on you a little bit too. If you're bringing too many things to the table, it can be a confusing experience for both parties. So it's important to kind of find that right balance. But I think that really thinking about it from an interest-based negotiations perspective is important, the kind of first step. And I think an important second step is just really recognizing that this is a really stressful event, right? It's emotional. It's emotional for you. A lot of times, within a consumer brand, this could make or break your year. It's going to set up how much budget you have left over for other things that you want to do, either with Amazon or other retailers. It affects how you're perceived within the organization. There's a lot riding on this thing. And so just kind of like acknowledging that. And I think making sure to like take care of yourself during the process. I've worked with so many brands doing this, but even really large brands, VPs of e-commerce, et cetera, can lose sleep over this. And it's really not worth doing that. I think if you set up the right sequence of steps and follow a framework, just trust the framework, like trust that it will, you can't ultimately control the outcome, but you can certainly influence it with proper preparation.
Yeah, I think it's that unknown and the fact that, sometimes it happens more than once, but a lot of times it's happening once a year and there's not a lot of, it's not like this is, you can learn from somebody who's doing it for 40 years, right?
Yeah.
This is something in that it's evolved over time, but really rapidly within Amazon over the past decade or so, probably a little bit longer than that, maybe 15 years. And so there's not like somebody you can lean on that's done this for 40 years. And so there's this element of unknown. And when we can't control it, right, then I think that stress level and the anxiety goes up. So no, I love what you're saying, which is control what you can control and give yourself that, at least, relieve that sense of anxiety as a whole. Then the 4-step framework. But
yeah. I'll share a little bit about that. I think, and I also have some data that's kind of interesting from Stratably's 2024 negotiations survey. So I can share a little bit of data on how that shook out for brands. Yeah, I've got some of that in front of me right now. His report was great.
Russ Derringer over at Stratably, everybody. Go
Yes. If you have not checked out his AVN wrap up benchmark, they interviewed roughly 300 brands and like asked them how they performed on terms, et cetera. And so I have a couple of data points from that are pretty interesting. The biggest being that like 72% of brands say that there's meaningful challenges for them in this process. So you're not alone. Like if it's your brand listening to this and you're finding it to be challenging, you're certainly not alone. It's not like all the other brands have it figured out. It also takes a long time. His data showed that the negotiations lasted an average of 3.5 months. So, and some brands I work with are already a year later and still kind of trying to close their terms for that previous year and coming up against the next year. So it can take a long time. On average, brands saw an increase in total trade terms last year of 68 basis points. But about half of them increased trade terms by 0.5% or less. So like very nominal increases or improvements in trade terms, and 9% decreased trade terms. So if you're ever asking yourself as a brand, is it possible to go backwards on terms? The answer is yes. And we have seen brands successfully do that with, again, that right level of preparation. So those are kind of some highlights from the 2024 season that I thought were sort of interesting. Definitely check out his report and check out Stratably in general because they're amazing. Put out really
I got to ping Russ to see if maybe he'll do a follow up to this podcast with Russ. I'll ping him right after this, right? Because that'd be great to kind of walk through all of that as well, so people can benchmark themselves. And maybe I do that middle of the year when people have wrapped it up. But
so the 4-step framework that will help you be successful negotiating with Amazon or in many other things in your life is called the FIRM framework. So it stands for find your data. F is find your data. And I'll walk through each of these in a little more detail. Isolate your leverage, relax and go slow, and make asks of your own. So FIRM, find your data, isolate your leverage, relax and go slow, and make asks of your own. And that first piece, finding your data, is that's kind of where we see most brands struggle. It's in that preparation phase. So if you look at like the phases of a negotiation, it's preparation, bargaining, closing, and then learning. We typically see brands kind of struggle in the preparation phase and then also struggle in the learning phase. I think kind of given that the average negotiation lasts 3.5 months, by the time this thing is over, you're just like, whoo, like, let's move on to get back to my day job, right? But it's so important to take a beat, get the team back together, write down some learnings, recap, like figure out what you want to change for next year, do a what worked, what didn't work exercise, and capture those learnings somewhere, because first, there is more really likely to be someone new on the desk on Amazon side next year. So you're going to want to have an artifact. And then, you might have some different people on your team going through the process next year. So having some notes is going to be really important. But finding your data is about treating the negotiation like a project. It's something that we prepare for. We assemble a project team. We do an internal kickoff meeting. We think about what our goals are. What do we want to accomplish this year? What if we don't get what we want? What's our best alternative? Thinking about, setting a timeline internally. So when, the hardest, I think, tough spots that brands end up in are where you're down to the wire on the negotiation and suddenly you need something from your finance partner and your finance partner isn't teed up to do that for you, right? Like they're not aware this is going on, or they didn't realize they were gonna, there's gonna be a data ask for them. So just getting that team kind of prepared in the beginning, I think is so important. And then collecting all of your data and thinking about, what are we like? I was so surprised during my time at Amazon how many times I get on the phone to negotiate with a vendor and they didn't even know what their current terms were with Amazon. So you want to have you at least need to know your starting place. You can use a tracker. I have like a free one on our website, but just put it in Excel, like just what are all of your terms and what is Amazon asking for this year so you can see it all together. Oftentimes Amazon will come with a ask over email and maybe they'll include 3 of your terms, but you have 5. And so making sure you kind of understand the whole picture, I think, is so important. And then, in that preparation phase, just remaining like the preparation will calm you. It will have a calming effect. Like getting everything together will make you feel prepared and ready to go.
How many people aren't prepared? Were you ever like shocked on the Amazon side with this? It's such a big part of people's business or growth plans. I mean, I am just when I'm talking to people, they have a lot of people have questions around AVNs, and I'm always shocked at how much people don't know, which is totally befuddles me. It might even
Yeah.
be profit margins, number of ASINs, right? Like they might have multiple vendor codes. They might actually across multiple vendor codes have multiple, even though it's all shipping out of the same facility now, different terms. Like
I
how
would say
often do
like
you think?
almost every brand was not prepared enough.
Yeah,
Yeah. But I think the good news is like there's a way to prepare. This is a achievable exercise for a brand, to go through and take a look at what their current cost to serve is, pulling some data from Vendor Central, from external tools, which leads me really quickly to the I part, which is isolating your leverage. And that's where you really want to figure out what is the unique value you're bringing to Amazon. And you do that through some of the data that you're pulling, or maybe you know that. But every brand is adding some value to Amazon.com, or you wouldn't be still selling there. So, what is it? Figuring out what it is, I think is really important. And that's, is it your retail media advertising spend? Are you driving a lot of traffic to Amazon? Do you have a high loyalty, highly loyal shopper base that's engaged in subscribe and save or repeat purchase? Do you have a lot of reviews on your products? Are you driving sales growth? Are you driving profitability? I mean, there's so many different leverage points. Do you have a really reliable supply chain? Is it super speedy? You have a lot of great innovation that shoppers love. Like there are so many different areas that you might have leverage. And if you don't know, you can pull some competitive data. You can look at that. You can also ask. We talked about what is going on inside the vendor manager's head, and I think one thing to know about them as just a little bit of a sidebar is that probably most people listening who've worked with vendor managers would know that they don't have often a lot of business experience. They're coming from an MBA program or from a different field of work. But they are smart people. Amazon hires smart people. And so they're really figuring out how to scale. They might be managing hundreds, maybe even thousands of vendors, and they'd really like to be promoted. The Amazon hires really hungry people. So they're often working on some other special project in addition to, ownership over the category or subcategory. Ask them what their special project is. Ask them how you can help. Learn a little bit more about what it would take to kind of make that person look good, but also ask questions about your business as you're developing that relationship. And a couple of my favorite questions to ask the vendor manager are, what excites you about my business? And what are my peers doing better than me? And, Amazon's not going to give you like hard data about any of these things, but they'll give you some clues, or I like the other one I like is what is your leadership wish we would do differently? And that can give you some opportunity areas. But I think what excites you is like that's kind of the leverage you're bringing to the table. And even if they just give you a little bit of an information, you could pick up on a lot of clues to really understand where your leverage is in the negotiation.
Yeah. I mean, I found that from a vendor manager standpoint, those who believed in my business and it was an opportunity for growth were all in. They could pick up the phone when I called. I could text them. They'd actually, they go out for lunch or a dinner, which is kind of rare. And I do like what you said from the personalization standpoint is like, it is a relationship at the end of the day, right? I mean, it's a little bit different, but I end up being able to find time just by being nice. Like, hey, do you want to go grab a beer after? You want to
Yeah,
eat lunch? Let's just go grab some tacos or something, right? Like, usually not a huge
absolutely.
time commitment. But the biggest thing was, yeah, if I could get them excited about the business or an opportunity for growth, they were way more involved in every aspect of the business from, fixing, broken ASINs to whatever, right? And on cords getting pulled. Um,
Yeah, that common ground, like you could also look at your leverage point as a common ground. It's something that's adding value to, it's important to you. It's also important to Amazon. It's adding value to the Amazon business. And, I think that was a great point you just made about the relationship building with the vendor management team and how that can look a little bit different. It might not be kind of that slower progression, getting to know about someone's family, sort of traditional relationship building that we're used to, but asking them about their projects, asking them what excites them about your business, finding that common ground, I think, is a great way to develop that relationship.
Awesome.
Okay, so
I've got
find
a
your
bunch
data.
of questions, and then I'm holding him to the end before so we can get through the 4-step, or we'll never get through.
Find your data, isolate your leverage. Third is relax and go slow. This one kind of speaks for itself, but we had a client a while back where they'd gotten an email from Amazon asking them to approve a freight allowance. It was an algorithmically generated email. They were asking for an 18% freight allowance. That's a really high freight allowance if you're not kind of familiar with the sort of how the terms work. The vendor clicked on the email, which auto approves it in Vendor Central immediately. So there's no undo button once you've agreed to something in writing. So they were stuck with an 18% freight allowance all year. And it was really, I mean, it's a small vendor. They didn't have a lot of access to Amazon vendor management team. So really thinking about relax, go slow. There's not an undo button. Think about ways you can slow it down if it's going too fast. Even if you're negotiating not with a vendor manager and you're negotiating over email with, AI or a professional negotiator on Amazon's side, you might not always be negotiating with Amazon. So, are there ways you can slow it down? Can you ask for more data? Can you ask for a call? Can you ask for more time? Can you agree on what you already agree on and then come back with the rest? Can you give a date for a date? So what are some ways, thinking about ways you can slow it down if it feels like it's moving too fast and it's not going your way? So that's relax and go slow.
I'm taking notes and I'm holding my questions to the end.
And then the last one's making asks of your own and identifying easy gives. So this is another area where we sometimes see brands maybe not have put the prep or the thought into this, but if you're in a position where you're asked to give Amazon something and you are negotiating with the vendor manager or the category management team, think about what you need from them. If they came to you and they asked for 5 extra points of co-op year on year, which is a really large ask, not saying you should give it to them, but maybe it might open your thinking to think about what would have to be true for me to want to give that to them. Like, what needs do I have? What needs do I have outside of my department? What right now is blocking your growth and profitability? Forget about the terms that are in front of you. Like, what broader issues, maybe as a part of a joint business plan, or if you don't have access to that process with Amazon, the negotiation is your joint business plan. So really thinking about what's blocking your growth and profitability. Do you need issue resolution? Do you need some chargeback relief? Do you need shortage settlements? Is there additional data or reporting you need? Do you need introductions to the fresh team? Like, what is it you need from Amazon? Because this is your time to ask. And so with that, thinking about what you want and then identifying things that would be easy to give to Amazon. So what are things that are pretty lightweight for you, but they would love, right? Are you working with a category that's kind of more in a development phase? They might really like access to all the paid research that you guys have, from eMarketer and all of the great companies out there that put together category specific research. They might really like to know a little bit more about how the shopper behaves and what might be important to them. As an example, when I was running the baby category at Amazon, we were revamping the baby registry, and I did not know anything about baby registries. And so we really relied on the vendor community to send us reports to help us understand what the key features were that we needed to have. So, are there things that are easy for you to give? And they could even be more operational or supply chain oriented or financial, but are there things you could give that wouldn't cost you very much, but would be very valuable to Amazon?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Those two things I think are key, and there might, outside of the not pulling all the data in the beginning, are probably some of the most common things that I think don't happen, which is that real deep, long look at what am I willing to give up and like you said, what needs to be true. If I'm willing to do this, if they come back and it's almost like scenario playing out, they come back and ask for a percentage point. What needs to be true for me to give that? Okay, let's look at 2%. Let's look at 3. If they go crazy at 5, what would have to be true? And maybe they can make it true, but then align your ask accordingly with those. No, that's awesome. Awesome.
So that's firm. That's the firm framework. Now everyone's all ready.
Yeah. Um, so I jotted down some questions that come up, and then from a lot of brands is you'd mentioned like on the paid media side, a lot of people are they try to make the argument that, hey, I'm not going to give you percentage points here because I'm going to spend paid media over here. And from what I've understood or gathered that, those are two completely separate and they have two separate goals. One wants to make lots of money off your media and one wants to make lots of money off your products. And so a lot of times those are broken in they're not necessarily, you're not necessarily able to use it as a negotiation tool that I'm going to go spend $1 million in paid media over here rather than giving you $1 million in additional points. What's the thought on that?
I mean, Amazon would certainly like you to think that they're very disconnected, right? It would be in theory, in their best interest to make you feel they're very disconnected so that you can't just move beans from one area to another. I mean, I think the reality that we see with the vendor community is that it's a lot more connected than it seems. And so one recommendation I have, particularly for any large brands listening, is make sure that the timeline, if you're negotiating like an advertising joint business plan and you're making an advertising commitment for the year with Amazon, and even especially if you're signing something, don't let the timeline for that negotiation get out of sync with the commercial terms negotiation. Like you want those on the same timeline because you want to be able to say, we're not really ready to sign the advertising JBP yet because we're still working on the commercial terms. So like so that Amazon gets the message that we're working with I mean, they're different budgets, but it's one company. We're working with like a totality of dollars here, and we have to figure out how we're going to spend it. At the end of the day, if you were a vendor manager at Amazon, and you had to choose between having a little bit of a better net PPM and having the brand spend more on retail media advertising, which we know drives growth, provided that the items that you're selling are sustainably profitable, you'd probably rather them put it toward the growth. I mean, if you think about it. So I think there are lots of times where that doesn't work out if the items are structurally unprofitable. Amazon certainly doesn't want you pushing and promoting items where they lose money. But if you're in a pretty decent position from a net PPM perspective, all things equal, as a company, Amazon would probably rather you put the money toward a demand driving activity. But I think a lot of vendors are not in that position. They're more in a position of, there's some profit challenges. Amazon's having some profit challenges with the business. And so they kind of have to get that resolved. But, our advice on that front is it's a lot easier for Amazon to ask you for a terms improvement than it is for them to help you solve the actual problem. So, let's say they're asking you for an increase in a damage allowance because your damages are a little bit high. It's easier for them to ask you for the money than it is for them to help you root cause the problem, figure out what items we're talking about, do some, make some fixes in how you're packaging on your side, wait for that to kind of flow through to customers, see if the damage rate goes down. Like that's a long process and a costly one. So we always recommend, we do a mutual profitability class and workshop. And in that one, we talk about finding the root cause and making sure that you're really bottoming out the issues and as much as possible, resisting kind of paying for those through terms negotiations.
Awesome. So the next one you're saying, the go slow, right? I have a lot of questions around that. And then you brought up, that it might be just a virtual negotiation for people out there who they have a vendor central account, but they don't have any contact with the vendor manager whatsoever. And it seems like you're negotiating with an AI assistant. Is there anything like, what's the recommendation for those people who don't actually get to interact with the vendor manager?
Yeah. I mean, I think generally speaking, it's probably a good thing if you can get kicked out of that process as an exception rather than continue negotiating with an AI chatbot and get punted to a real person just to buy, at least if for nothing else, to buy you more time, right? But I think, we have seen brands be successful if you are stuck negotiating with an AI chatbot, you don't have to agree to what they're proposing. You can respond with a tiny, tiny incremental improvement in some cases. And depending on how the AI is set up, it may accept that. So really just like first of all, recognizing that you might be interacting with AI, I think is important. And then thinking about now a lot of us use ChatGPT and other tools, so we're getting more familiar with how to interact with AI. And you don't talk to ChatGPT the same way you talk to your friend. So I would think about how you might be able to continue the process whilst giving as little as possible.
Yeah. And what about this idea that do I just wait, right? If my vendor manager has a number that they have to hit, is it worth it to just wait and hopefully they solve that? They get all those gains from everybody else in the category?
That's such a great question, Aaron, because that is like a really controversial topic. And I have seen brands who take the stance of, we're going to go to Amazon with our terms ask this year. Like they feel very strongly that they initiate the process, the brand initiates the process, and that is why they are successful every year. And then I have other brands I've worked with who take the opposite position where they say, we're going to wait as long as possible because maybe the vendor manager will close or the category will close what they need to close. And I have seen both be successful and both be unsuccessful. So I have not observed any trends, but I think, whatever makes you feel prepared for the negotiation and calm through the process. I mean, those are the two things, right? Like you have to remain calm and you need to make sure that you're prepared. And so if one of those helps you do that more than the other, if it gives you a better sense of control to approach Amazon and get it done early versus waiting and being at the subject to their timeline, and maybe they're going to come to me at the last minute and we don't know, whatever gives you a better sense of control, I think, and keeps you calmer is going to likely result in a more successful negotiation for you.
Awesome. And now the question around tariffs. We have to get to this one before.
Yes.
Nobody knows what's going on right now, right? That's the reality is everybody's holding their breath. I've had budgets held back. I've seen a massive increase in bringing, product into the US ahead of tariffs. People are scrambling to figure it out. People who can't do that are assuming they're going to have to go in with a price increase. Would love to hear your thoughts here. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Is there anything that people can do?
I think this is a really tricky one, because what I remember from Amazon's position during COVID, when a lot of manufacturers I don't know if everyone remembers, but sort of like very different pockets in manufacturer supply chains became extremely expensive, like very quickly.
Well,
and
it was
a lot of
containers. A container that was like $3,500 went to $20,000.
Yeah, that was a little bit later. Earlier, it was like certain manufacturing facilities weren't operating in China that made chip components. I mean, we had a cell phone screen protector client who there's like a special something that's in that factory went closed down because of COVID. And so they couldn't get that particular component, had to pay more for it. So there were all these areas where brands had more costs and they attempted to pass cost increases onto Amazon. And back at that point, Amazon was extremely resistant to this and if I were them, I would be thinking, how do I know when costs return to normal, it's not like you're going to bring your costs back down. So I would expect Amazon to be very resistant to taking cost price increases for tariffs. Some ideas I had kind of chatting with some of my industry colleagues actually a couple nights ago about this were some of the ideas we had were, maybe there's an opportunity to do some other sort of a term reduction, that's in place for a fixed period of time that expires and then you reevaluate it? Or is there another way to get a cost price increase through that might not be in the actual mechanics of increasing the cost price, because I think Amazon's going to be really sensitive to that. Can you get a co-op break for a certain amount of time? Are there other things you can do? But I think anytime you're trying to push cost increases through to Amazon, it needs to be very well documented. You need to give them a lot of notice. You need to make a case in email such that it could be forwarded to their leadership team, if it came to that. Those are all things that you need to assure them that the cost increase is being passed on to all retailers. Obviously, that's an area that they get really sensitive about. And so those are things that would help with your success rate. But there's still no guarantees. We do see a lot of times manufacturers have to move to a stop ship situation in order to get Amazon to respond to and agree to cost increases.
Yeah. So I've been picking your brain, and yeah, I always like to throw it back. Like, any questions that you have for me, I always like to give that opportunity as well as we get to the end of an episode.
Well, what do you think is going to happen with the tariffs?
Man, I wish I knew if this.
I know, right?
There's a giant wrecking ball going around right now. The tough part is there's a lot of it that I think people generally agree with, that there is something that needs to be done, but the fact that it doesn't seem to be strategic at all has a lot of people just scratching their heads.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I know I'm feeling a lot of those questions right now. And what I'm really good at is helping people with digital strategy, with service provider selection, like, hey, what are the newest trends, the pain points, what's making brands win or lose? What I'm not great is tariffs.
Predicting the future. I don't think any of us are, Aaron.
Yeah.
No one can predict the future.
And so for me, it's causing a lot of angst and a lot of turmoil, and that stinks for brands because, the digital, anybody that was in e-commerce that took that leap, 10 years ago, they're looking for a little excitement. They're looking for a challenge. They like to live a little bit in the unknown, but the unknown for things that they can help, they can try to solve for, right? Like, whether it's paid media or content optimization or conversion rate optimization, like, it's an unknown, but you can go solve it. And in those things you can't solve for. And it was, similar to what you're saying, like with COVID, where you randomly have things shutting down or cost of transportation going up 7-fold. There's no solve for that. And
we have to work your way through it.
Yeah. So, brands right now, the number one thing is profitability. I also see there's a big headcount reduction towards the end of last year. So people are doing more than they've ever done before. Fortunately, there's some new AI tools that are popping up. Like, I feel like we've turned the corner really on AI and machine learning. Like, there's new tools that are actually, not $15,000 a month. They're under $2,000 a month, and they actually do a lot of work. The next level is getting people on the team to use them.
Yeah.
And when people are in the routine and they can do it, they don't have enough time to learn a new tool, and they don't want to. And so the adoption of those tools are going to be very, very, very interesting. It's going to be an interesting timeline.
Yeah.
But once it kicks off, if you're not playing around these AI tools today, all of a sudden you'll be left behind. You'll just be left behind.
I could not agree more, Aaron.
So,
good luck to all the brands out there. If you're still going through your AVN process.
And where did they find you? Is it the Illume Group?
It's illumegroup.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, Andrea Leigh, Leigh.
100%. If you need any help, for everybody listening in this space, you want to have some people come in or do a webinar or anything like that, it's a lot more in depth, what you could get on that, but 100% worth following up with Andrea. But thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks,
with
Aaron.
That, absolutely, we will wrap up this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Thanks everybody for listening in.